Hi, Moskowitz here. We are about to finish reading The Call of the Wild. I hope you enjoyed this story. At this point, Buck is really turning into a wild dog. He's being compelled to run into the forest. He's been hunting. He killed a bear in the last reading. So let's continue and see how the story wraps up. And again, this chapter is called The Sounding of the Call. As the fall of the year came on, the moose appeared in greater abundance, moving slowly down to meet the winter in the lower and less vigorous valleys. Buck had already dragged down a stray part grown calf, but he wished strongly for larger or more formidable quarry, and he came upon it one day on the divide at the head of a creek. A band of 20 moose had crossed over from the land of streams and timber, and chief among them was a great bull. He was in savage temper and standing over 6 feet from the ground, and was as formidable an antagonist as even Buck could desire. Back and forth, the bull tossed his great palmated antlers, branching to 14 points and embracing 7 feet within the tips. His small eyes burned with a vicious and bitter light, while he roared with fury at the sight of Buck. A normal dog or wolf on their own cannot bring down a moose. They're gigantic, they're very dangerous with their giant antlers and their big hooved feet. Just their body size is massive. They're bigger than cars. If you hit a moose with your car is definitely totaled, and the moose might walk away from it. From the bull's side, just forward of the flank, protruded a feathered arrow end, which accounted for his savageness. Guided by that instinct which came from the old hunting days of the primordial world, Buck proceeded to cut the bull out from the herd. It was no slight task. He would bark and dance about in front of the bull, just out of reach of the great antlers and of the terrible splay hoofs which could have stamped his life out with a single blow. Unable to turn his back on the fang danger and go on, the bull would be driven into paroxysms of rage. At such moments, he charged Buck, who retreated craftily, luring him on by a simulated inability to escape. But when he was thus separated from his fellows, 2 or 3 of the young bulls would charge back upon him and enable the wounded bull to rejoin the herd. So, one of the things he's trying to do here is remove a single moose from the rest of the herd so it's easier to catch and kill. And ambuscade is an ambush, just so you know. There is a patience of the wild, dogged, tireless, persistent as life itself, that holds motionless for endless hours, the spider in its web, the snake in its coil, the panther in its ambuscade. This patience belongs peculiarly to life when it hunts its living food, and it belonged to Buck as he clung to the flank of the herd, retarding its march, irritating the young bulls, worrying the cows with their half-grown calves, and driving the wounded bull mad with helpless rage. For half a day this continued, and Buck multiplied himself, attacking on all sides, enveloping the herd in a whirlwind of menace, cutting out his victim as fast as it could rejoin its mates, wearing out the patience of creatures preyed upon, which is a lesser patience than that of creatures preying. So basically, he picks the one wounded bull who has a Indian arrow embedded in his behind, and he's trying to take him out and separate and wear him down. So he keeps like going back and forth, and slowly extricating him from the rest of the moose and wearing him down and exhausting him until he gets to a point where Buck can actually attack him. As the day wore along and the sun dropped to its bed in the northwest, the darkness had come back and the fall nights were 6 hours long. The young bulls retraced their steps more and more reluctantly to the aid of their beset leader. The downcoming winter was harrying them on the lower levels, and it seemed they could never shake off this tireless creature that held them back. Besides, it was not the life of the herd or the young bulls that was threatened. The life of only one member was demanded, which was a remoter interest to their lives, and in the end, they were content to pay the toll. Meaning the rest of the herd of moose is content to pay the toll. They're content to let him take down the one moose so the rest of them can move on in safety. As twilight fell, the old bull stood with lowered head, watching his mates, the cows he had known, the calves he had fathered, the bulls he had mastered, as they shambled on at a rapid pace through the fading light. he could not follow, for before his nose leaped the merciless fanged terror that would not let him go. 300 weight more than half a ton he weighed. He had lived a long, strong life full of fight and struggle, and at the end, he faced death at the teeth of a creature whose head did not reach beyond his great buckled knees, or knuckled knees. So he weighs almost a ton, and he has this big giant dog and Buck, but still a dog who they're saying doesn't even come up to his knees, and this is what is going to take this great moose down. From then on, night and day, Buck never left his prey, never gave it a moment's rest, never permitted it to browse the leaves of trees or the shoots of young birch and willow. Nor did he give the wounded bull opportunity to slake his burning thirst in the slender trickling streams they crossed. Often in desperation, he burst into long stretches of flight or running away. At such times, Buck did not attempt to stay him, but loped easily at his heels, satisfied with the way the game was played, lying down where the moose stood still, attacking him fiercely when he strove to eat or drink. One of the things to keep in mind, too, is that this whole time, Buck could easily take on smaller prey to feed himself. This is a game for him. It's a challenge. If you notice throughout the novel, he's rising to higher and higher, more demanding challenges as the novel progresses. And at every point, Buck is his heart and soul, the passion of it is somebody who yearns to be the very best they can be at all times. So this would be like the next great challenge. He's taken down a bear. This moose is the last thing standing between him and being the top of the pack of the wilderness. The great head drooped more and more under its tree of horns, and the shambling trot grew weak and weaker, and he took to standing for long periods with nose to the ground and dejected ears drooped limply. And Buck found more time in which to get water for himself and which to rest. At such moments, panting with red lolling tongue and with eyes fixed upon the big bull, it appeared to Buck that a change was coming over the face of things. He could feel a new stir in the land. As the moose were coming into the land, other kinds of life were coming in. Forest and stream and air seemed palpitant with their presence. The news of it was borne in upon him not by sight or sound or smell, but by some other and subtler sense. He heard nothing, saw nothing, yet knew that the land was different somehow, and through it strange things were afoot and ranging, and he resolved to investigate after he had finished the business at hand. So at this point, he hasn't returned to camp because he's chasing this moose. At the end of the fourth day, he pulled the great moose down, and for a day and night he remained by the kill, eating and sleeping, turn and turn about. Then, rested, refreshed, and strong, he turned his face towards camp and John Thornton, and he broke into a long, easy lope and went on, hour after hour, never at loss for the tangled way, heading straight home through strange country with a certitude of direction that put man and his magnetic needle to shame. So he's finally going home and returning to John Thornton after this wild rampage in the woods. So as he held on, he became more and more conscious of the new stir in the land. There was life abroad it that was different from the life which had been brought here throughout the summer. No longer was this fact borne in upon him in some subtle, mysterious way. The birds talked of it, the squirrels chattered about it, the very breeze whispered of it. Several times he stopped and drew in the fresh morning air in great sniffs, reading a message which made him leap on with greater speed. He was oppressed with a sense of calamity happening, if it were not calamity already happened. And as he crossed the last watershed and dropped down into the valley toward camp, he proceeded with greater caution. Now, Buck has extremely good senses. If you remember earlier, when he was leading the sled that had Mercedes and Hal and Charles, he had that impending sense of doom because he's so in tune with nature. So he felt the ice melting under his paws. And at the point he was rescued by John Thornton, it's because he would no longer move because he anticipated this with this foreboding sense of doom, this foreshadowing of this event that occurred where Mercedes, Hal, and Charles went into the ice with all the sled dogs. And now again, from far, far away, he starts to notice these subtle changes in the woodlands, the tone or the mood or the feel of it. And as he gets closer to camp, The other animals are acting strange and different than usual, and he can hear that something is afoot just in the way the birds are chittering. The squirrels are running about. Even in the breeze, he can smell different smells. And if you're a good reader, you understand that Buck is usually correct and that this is going to foreshadow some sort of monumentous change in the environment of this part of the wilderness. All right, so Buck's going back to camp. John Thornton must have really missed him. Okay. And so the whole way back, Buck is sensing danger. 3 miles away, he came upon a fresh trail that sent his neck hair rippling and bristling. It led straight toward camp and John Thornton. Buck hurried on swiftly and stealthily, every nerve straining and tense, alert to the multitudinous details which told the story all but the end. His nose gave him a varying description of the passage of the life on the heels of which he was traveling. He remarked the pregnant silence of the forest. The bird life had flitted, the squirrels were hiding. When only he saw a sleek gray fellow flattened against a gray dead limb so that it seemed to be a part of it, a woody excrescence upon the wood itself. As Buck slid along with the obscureness of a gliding shadow, his nose was jerked suddenly to the side as though a positive hand had gripped and pulled it. He followed a new scent into the thicket and found Nig. He was lying on his side, dead where he had dragged himself, an arrow protruding, head and feathers from either side of his body. So now Buck knows something is terribly wrong. Nig is dead in the wilderness, arrow sticking out of him. 100 yards farther on, Buck came upon one of the sled dogs Thornton had bought in Dawson. This dog was thrashing about in a death struggle directly on the trail, and Buck passed around him without stopping. And from the camp came the faint sound of many voices rising and falling in a sing-song chant. Bellying forward to the edge of the clearing, he found Hans lying on his face, feathered with arrows like a porcupine. At the same instant, Buck peered out where the spruce bough lodge had been and saw what made his hair leap straight up and on his neck and shoulders. A gust of overpowering rage swept him. He did not know that he growled, but he growled aloud with a terrible ferocity. For the last time in his life, he allowed passion to usurp cunning and reason, and it was because of his great love for John Thornton that he lost his head. The Yehots, a Native American tribe, were dancing about the wreckage of the Spruce Bough Lodge when they heard a fearful roaring and saw rushing upon them an animal, the like of which they had never seen before. It was Buck, a live hurricane of fury, hurling himself upon them in a frenzy to destroy. He sprang at the foremost man. It was the chief of the Yehots, ripping the throat wide open till the rent jugular spouted a fountain of blood. He did not pause to worry the victim, but ripped in passing, with the next bound tearing wide the throat of a second man. There was no withstanding him. He plunged about in their very midst, tearing, rendering, destroying in constant and terrific motion, which defied the arrows they discharged at him. In fact, so inconceivably rapid were his movements, and so closely were the Indians tangled together, that they shot one another with the arrows, and one young hunter, hurling a spear at Buck in midair, drove it through the chest of another hunter with such force that the point broke through the skin of the back and stood out beyond. Then a panic seized the Yehots, and they fled in terror to the woods, proclaiming as they fled the advent of an evil spirit. So Buck gets into camp. It becomes horrifically obvious to him that John Thornton has been murdered by the Yeehot Native Americans. And Buck, for once, loses his rational mind and cunning, and he goes on a violent terror to the point where the Yeehots don't even think that he's a dog or a wolf. They think that he's an evil spirit come to destroy them. And Buck just rips through them and destroys the tribe, losing his mind. And then when they flee, Buck is going to follow them to kill them. And truly, Buck was the fiend incarnate, raging at their heels and dragging them down like deer as they raced through the trees. It was a fateful day for the Yehots. They scattered far and wide over the country, and it was not till a week later that the last of the survivors gathered together in the lower valley and counted their losses. As for Buck, wearying of the pursuit, he returned to the desolated camp and he found Pete where he'd been killed in his blankets in the moment of surprise. Thornton's desperate struggle was fresh written on the earth, and Buck scented every detail of it down to the edge of a deep pool. By the edge, head and 4 feet in the water, lay Skeet, faithful to the last. The pool, muddy and discolored from the sluice boxes, effectually hid what it contained, and it contained John Thornton, for Buck followed his trace into the water from which no trace led away. All day Buck brooded by the pool or roamed restlessly by the camp. Death as a cessation of movement, as a passing out and away from the lives of the living he knew, and he knew John Thornton was dead. It left a great void in him, somewhat akin to hunger, but a void which ached and which food could not fill. At times, when he paused to contemplate the carcasses or dead of the Yehots, he forgot the pain of it, and such times he was aware of a great pride in himself, a pride greater than any he had ever experienced. He had killed man, the noblest game of all, and he had killed in the law of Club of Fang. He sniffed the bodies curiously. They had died so easily. It was harder to kill a husky dog than them. They were no match at all. Were it not for their arrows and spears and clubs, thenceforward he would be unafraid of them except where they bore in their hand their arrows, spears, and clubs. So at this point, John Thornton, the one thing keeping him in any sort of civilized life experience was his love for John Thornton. But now that John Thornton is dead, he has to decide what he's going to do with his destiny. Night came on, and a full moon rose over the trees into the sky, lighting the land till it bathed in ghostly day. And with the coming of the night, brooding and mourning by the pool, Buck became alive to a stirring of a new life in the forest other than that which the Yehots had made. He stood up, listening and scenting, and from far away drifted a faint, sharp yelp, followed by a chorus of similar sharp yelps. As the moments passed, the yelps grew closer and closer, and again Buck knew them as things heard in the other world which persisted in his memory. He walked to the center of the open space and listened. It was the call, the many noted call, sounding more alluringly and compelling than ever before. And as never before, he was ready to obey. John Thornton was dead. The last tie was broken. Man and the claims of man no longer bound him. Hunting their living meat as the Yehots were hunting it on the flank of the migrating moose, the wolf pack had at last crossed over the land of streams and timber and invaded Buck's Valley. Into the clearing where the moonlight streamed, they poured in a silvery flood, and in the center of the clearing stood Buck, motionless as a statue, waiting their coming. They were awed. So still and large he stood, and for a moment's pause, till the boldest one leaped straight for him, like a flash Buck struck, breaking the neck. Then he stood without movement, as before, the stricken wolf rolling in agony behind him. 3 others tried in sharp succession, and one after the other they drew back, streaming blood from slashed throats or shoulders. This was sufficient to fling the whole pack forward, pell-mell, crowded together, blocked and confused by its eagerness to pull down the prey. Buck's marvelous quickness and agility stood him in good stead. Pivoting on his hind legs and snapping and gashing, he was everywhere at once, presenting a front which was apparently unbroken, so swiftly did he whirl and guard from side to side. But to prevent them from getting behind him, he was forced back down past the pool and into the creek bed till he brought up against a high gravel bank. He worked along on the right angle to the bank which the men had made in the course of mining, and in this angle he came to bay, protected on 3 sides, with nothing to do but face the front. And so well did he face it that at the end of half an hour the wolves drew back discomfited. The tongues were all out and lolling, the white fangs showed cruelly white in the moonlight, and some were lying down with heads raised and ears pricked forward, while others stood on their feet watching him, and still others were lapping water from the pool. One wolf, long and lean and gray, advanced cautiously in a friendly manner, and Buck recognized the wild brother with whom he had run for a day and night. He was whining softly, and as Buck whined, they touched noses. All right, so this is in wolf dog speak, like, okay, We're going to be friends now. It's how they get to know each other. Then an old wolf, gaunt and battle-scarred, came forward, and Buck writhed his lips into a preliminary of a snarl, but sniffed noses with him, whereupon the old wolf sat down, pointed nose at the moon, and broke the long wolf howl. The others sat down and howled, and now the call came to Buck in unmistakable accents. He too sat down and howled. This over, he came out of his angle, and the pack crowded around him, sniffing in half-friendly, half-savage manners. The leader lifted the yelp of the pack and sprang away into the woods. The wolves swung in behind him, yelping in chorus, and Buck ran with them side by side, with the wild brother yelping as he ran. Okay. And here may well end the story of Buck. The years were not many when the Yeehats noted a change in the breed of timber wolves, for some were seen with splashes of brown on head and muzzle, and with a rift of white centering down the chest. But more remarkable than this, the Yeehats tell of a ghost dog that runs at the head of the pack. They are afraid of this ghost dog, for it has cunning greater than they, stealing from their camps in fierce winters, robbing their traps, slaying their dogs, and defying their bravest hunters. Buck is still spoken of by the tribes as a superstition and a legend at this point. Nay, the tale grows worse. Hunters there, hunters there are who fail to return to the camp, and hunters there have been whom their tribesmen found with throats slashed cruelly open with wolf prints about them in the snow greater than the prints of any wolf. Each fall, when the Yeehats follow the movement of the moose, there is a certain valley which they never enter, and women there are who become sad when the word goes out over the fire how the evil spirit came to select the valley for an abiding place. In the summer, there is one visitor, however, to the valley of which the Yeehats do not know. It is a great, gloriously coated wolf, like and yet unlike all the other wolves. He crosses alone from the smiling timberland and comes down into an open space among the trees. Here a yellow stream flows from rotted moose hide sacks and sinks to the ground, with long grasses flowing through it and vegetable mold overrunning it and hiding its yellow from the suns. And here he muses for a time, howling once long and mournfully before he departs. So Buck continuously returns to the valley with his pack of wolves where he lost John Thornton, and he howls and mourns his departure. You'll see that there's rumors and stories because now all the wolf pack have these wolves in new generations that have markings like Buck does. But he is not always alone. When the long winter nights come and the wolves follow their meat into the lower valleys, he may be seen running at the head of the pack through the pale moonlight or glimmering borealis, leaping gigantic above his fellows, his great throat a bellow as he sings a song of the younger world, which is the song of the pack. So as we end the story, Buck has found a pack. He's fully answered the call of the wild. I really hope you enjoyed this story. I enjoyed teaching and reading it again with you. It's always been one of my favorites, and I wish you the best of luck with everything and hope to see you guys soon. Have a great day. Bye bye.